Hello, I'm Mike Swanson. Thanks for joining us today. I'm speaking to you live from the Advocate Capital Studios in Nashville, Tennessee, Music City. So happy to be back in the studio. It's been about a year since we've used the studio, and I'm alone in the studio. Our producer, Amanda Unterreiner, is about 15 miles away working from home like we usually do, but it's just great to be back in the studio. Thank you for joining us. We have an excellent webinar for you today. Let's talk trucking litigation. Before we get started, let's see, I guess a few introductions would be appropriate. I'm Mike Swanson. I'm the CEO of Advocate Capital. I'm also an author. I wrote a book called How David Beats Goliath. It's the only finance training book ever produced to help plaintiff lawyers. If you'd like a copy, message me, reach out to me. I'll send you an ebook and hope that that would be helpful to you. Also, this webinar is brought to you by Advocate Capital. Over the shoulder, there it is. And we are the finest finance company ever for plaintiff lawyers. We can do anything a bank can do, but we'll do it better because we're a team of Seventh Amendment advocates who appreciate and believe in the work that plaintiff lawyers do. So for more information, Advocate Capital, our kind of main product over the past 20 years has been the AdvoTrack Case Expense Funding Service. And again, to find out more, visit advocatecapital.com. All right, let's keep moving here. A disclaimer first, not first, but next. This is not meant to be legal advice, so please don't base any important life decisions on what you're going to hear today. This is information purposes only. If you need legal advice, hire a lawyer. This is also not tax or accounting advice, although one of our guests is a master in tax. I'm not going to tell you which one, not yet anyway. So our three special guests today. First, we're going to meet Matt Wright, and Matthew Wright is an experienced plaintiff lawyer specializing in trucking. He's based in Nashville, Tennessee, a suburb, actually, Franklin. And Matt's actually about 3 miles away from my home. And so I've been able to stop by and visit Matt from time to time. So Matt's joining us today. We should see him in a moment. There he is. Hey, Matt. All right. I think you're muted. There you go. You bet. Next up is Mr. Terry Jackson from Atlanta, Georgia. And Terry has been practicing law for over 25 years, specializing in truck accident cases as well. Hello, Terry.
Hey, Mike, how are you? Hey, Matt.
Hey, Terry.
Yeah, we're doing good. Last but certainly not least, Mr. Michael Cowen from San Antonio, Texas, but actually has offices throughout Texas. And you probably have heard of Michael because he and Matt both are pretty frequent speakers around the CLE circuit and AAJ and others. So we're just so pleased to have everybody available today to do this live webinar. And it's challenging, but I've learned it's actually easier to be the host than it is to be the guest, because I get to throw the softballs out there and you guys get to hit them out of the park. So it's also fun to have a knowledgeable group to draw upon. So
don't be afraid to send us a fastball or a curveball every now and then. Things interesting.
Or you can always quiz each other too, stump the panel or something like that. Well, we'll probably get some of that because we're going to be entertaining questions. So to our viewers, if you have questions, feel free to send them. There's a questions dialog box. We will not reveal your identity. We'll keep that confidential, but we hope to be able to maybe handle a few during today's webinar or at the end if time permits. Also, if you're viewing this and you can't stay for the whole thing, or if you know somebody who registered and is not attending, all registrants will receive a link to a video of this webinar, so you'll be able to share that with friends and maybe partners at your law firm, things like that. So we'll make sure you get that within the next day or two. All right, so let's get started. We're talking trucking litigation, right? That's what this is all about. And so we've been very fortunate to have three of what I consider to be experts in trucking litigation with us. And we're gonna start with some basic questions about trucking. And you know, if you've been in this industry, you notice there's car accident guys and there's truck accidents. So I guess I'd like to ask first, you know, what makes trucking accidents different than other accidents? And Matt, would you go first?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Mike, and I'd be glad to address that. And we get that question a lot. And one of the things that I think is most different about a truck crash versus a car crash is that when we look at how we're going to prepare the case for trial, and that's what we're thinking about the minute the case comes in the door, what I'm always looking to uncover and what we train our team to do here is to look at what was the true underlying cause of the crash. And that is something that the jury is very interested in, and here's why. When they look at the facts of the case, they want to know, is the defendant blameworthy? And we can't directly assess their character. We can't get into things like that. But in trucking cases, we can uncover what the truck company should have done within reasonable care under the federal motor carrier safety regulations or under state law with regard to the hiring and the training of the drivers that they put out on the roads. And sometimes you get trucking companies that have very good policies but don't follow them. A lot of times you get ones that don't have any policies at all.
Wow. Or
do anything to enforce them. And so what we do from the minute the case comes in the door, so we can show if we get to trial that the defendant is blameworthy in this case and was negligent and that it wasn't an accident. And that's a big misnomer. These things are rarely accidents. They're preventable crashes, and the thing or things that could have been done and should have been done in reasonable care that would have prevented the crash is what we're looking to uncover throughout the duration of the case. And you've got to go as far back in time as possible to get to that point.
Yeah.
And you analyze the decisions that the truck company made way before the crash ever happened. And that's the main difference. And the way you present your proof at trial, if you have done your legwork, is going to be very different than if it was a standard car crash with a person in it who's not employed by a company who's entrusted with public safety. So that's the difference.
Okay. Terry, anything you'd like to add to that? What are any other key differences between a trucking accident versus just a car wreck?
Yeah, just those simple points. One is just the size, typical passenger vehicle, about 5,000 to 6,000 pounds, thereabouts. In trucking cases, you have 80,000 pound vehicles that articulate, and just the physics and math and reconstruction and the experts that are attended to that. The second is that Matt hit on is regulations on either side of it, whether it's intrastate or interstate, and FMCSA, the Public Service Commissions, or Motor Carrier Division, depending on the state you're in. And then the third that I think is really critical, it's just like any other tort case. Duty breach causes harm. But part of the harm in this is there's two human aspects. One is the driver. And drivers, there's lots of truck drivers, and they're a microcosm of our society. So anything you see happening in our society, whether it's, I call it drug, sex, and rock and roll for cases, you're going to see that, and it's typically proportionate. If you see a CDC study that 12% of drivers or society are regular drug users, then you're going to see that in truckers. They're no different. They're no worse. The other is what I call organizational behavior, what companies do. And old railroad lawyers, and there's a very famous lawyer here in Georgia that just passed away, Bobby Lee Cook. And, and I was speaking with him prior to his death, and he said railroads and trucking companies are the same. If those wheels don't roll, that money doesn't flow. And you got to look at the organizational behavior of both the trucker and the trucking company and template that on a complex physics problem and a regulatory issue. And there's still simple tort cases, but those are what I call three complicating factors in trucking.
Yeah. Michael, anything you'd like to add to that as far as what makes trucking accidents different from other accidents?
Well, they're a lot more fun as a lawyer. One, there's more insurance. So you actually get to fully work up your case because, if it's a state that has a $30,000 minimum insurance policy for a car wreck, you can only do so much on that case. Whereas a trucking case, there's enough where you get to dig in and figure out, is this just a driver that made a mistake, or is this as part of a company that made an unsafe decision that made a crash like this inevitable? And that's a lot more fun. It's a lot more profitable. But because there's more money, and it's not just about the money, it's just the money is there to justify digging in and digging deep. And the other thing is just when you really get to learn, there are so many economic incentives to break the rules. Because the companies that follow all the safety rules, you know, they're making less money per hour than the companies that break the rules, drive too much, lie about it, try to cover it up, don't spend money on training, don't spend money on safety. And the only thing that counters that is us. By exposing it and making people pay when that happens. So I think the biggest difference is, yeah, there's technical differences, they're bigger vehicles, they drive different, but to me the biggest difference is they're a lot more fun.
Interesting. That's great. Good point. Let's stay with you for a minute. I'd like to ask, don't list 10 of them, but maybe one or two, what you see the most common causes of trucking accidents.
Yeah, I think the most common cause I see is companies don't do anything to make sure their drivers know the rules. They don't test them, they don't train them. And then once they do that, they don't actually go and check on them when they're out on the road to make sure they're actually following the rules. And there are a ton of tools that they can use, from the simplest, you know, have someone ride with the driver every now and then, to more advanced, what they call telematics, where there's actually a camera on the driver and a camera on the road, and when certain things happen, video goes back, and everything in between. To me, those are the two biggest causes I see.
Yeah. Matt, anything you'd like to add to that as far as typical causes that you see?
Yeah, I agree with Michael to a great extent. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, the decision, when we go back in time before the crash happened, you can pinpoint it to the time that the driver was either hired or brought on and they didn't receive proper training and monitoring. And so the portion of the case that we usually are looking most critically at is, what did this company know, or should they have known, about this driver when they made the decision to hire him or her? And a lot of times you find out that, and I see this frequently, there's a regulation that says they have to check and send a form over to all previous motor carrier employers if they were driving with a CDL, and basically check the references is what we're talking about, and see if they had a good safe driving history, if they had any infractions. And a lot of times they don't even bother to do that.
Wow.
They claim they claim that, well, we couldn't get a hold, or they wouldn't respond. And so of course the government and the regulatory body knows that there's going to be a common response. And so they have said that you must document your efforts to reach that motor carrier. So when you get the driver qualification file, the DQF that we call it, I look for every motor carrier that this person put on their application that they ever worked for before, and make sure that there's documentation that they attempted to contact that company. And a lot of times you find it's not even there. So that's how you overcome their claim that, well, we called them, or we did this, or we did that, and they just didn't get back to us. So the truth of the matter is that what happens is that not only are they not a lot of times taking the time to contact those prior motor carriers that the driver worked for, but they're not really putting them through a proper training program, an onboarding program. They're just kind of going through the motions and having them come sit for a while and say, here's our vacation policy. They're not actually interested in making sure that that is a good, safe driver that they're putting out on the road. They may check boxes and say.
So the hiring, so poor hiring practices can be a cause, a frequent cause. Terry, anything you'd like to add to that as far as causes?
No, it's a lot of, there's lots of truck crashes out there, but, unfortunately, or I guess fortunately on some level, intellectually, you get cases in your office and you're looking. I have a particular case in my office at the moment with 4 fatality. There was a car dealership adjacent to I-75 North, and so I've got a real-time video 4 HD on a bright sunny day that shows a rear end collision at high speed in bumper to bumper traffic, vehicle flipping over, and the 4 occupants burned alive.
Oh my goodness.
So you look at that, and if you do enough of these trucking cases, the first thing that pops in your mind when you see that is fatigue and sleep. And then tying in exactly what Matt said is there's regulation in driver qualification files. Those are pretty ubiquitous in everybody's spoliation notice and stuff, but you actually have to dig in behind it. Exactly what Matt said. You get it, you get a driver qualification file, you see the guy's had a Class A or a CDL license for 8 years, but you only see 2 years of history on his employment application.
Oh.
And you don't have to be a simpleton like me to understand that if you've had a CDL license for 8 years and you've only got 2 years of history in the driver qualification file, something doesn't marry up.
Right.
What it requires is, just like Michael had said, is you got to dig in. If you see it, that doesn't make sense, then you've got to go maybe to the county where the guy lives. Ask some of his neighbors. They may have told you, say, yeah, he used to work for UPS or Archer Daniels, but he got fired because of A, B, and C. Sometimes you get lucky on things like that.
Right.
And in that particular case, when I say eyeball, when I saw it, I said, they say, how'd this happen? I said, there's no question. The guy fell asleep. He's exceeding his hours of service. He has sleep apnea or something else going on. And sure enough, he got sent to the ER. I subpoenaed his ER records. 6 foot tall, 485 pounds, body mass index of 69, tachycardia, other things in there. And this means something to Michael, and it means something to Matt, is those are bulbs going off in your head as to how did this joker ever get a CDL medical certificate, much less, and he couldn't pass the eyeball test if he walked in the room today or was on the Zoom. You'd look at him and say, you can drive for somebody, but it ain't going to be for us.
Well, that's interesting, and we have dozens of trial lawyers attending this webinar, so I'm going to start getting into the stuff I think they may be tuning in for, which let me start with you, Terry, on this one. So what are some of the critical steps to take when prosecuting a trucking accident? Not all of them, but a couple of them.
Yeah, when I say Mike had hit on this, they're expensive cases. When things happen, I'm sure Mike and Matt's office both had cases where lawyers got great trucking cases. Indecision, they don't hire the experts, or they hire experts and do some of the work, but not all of it. If you take these cases and you have death and serious injuries, you have to presume from day one, it's worst case scenario. You're going to be in intractable litigation. Multiple motions are going to be filed, and you're going to be dancing before a jury in closing argument. You need to operate on that premise. Get the right experts, get accident reconstructionists. If there's these days with telematics, cell phones, every now and then you'll see a heavy trucker, or you'll see in a GSP here, that's the State Patrol in Georgia, you'll see a photograph, you'll see a trucker that's got an eye watch on. Companies now even have wearables where they wear caps and it'll interact with their windshield to tell you whether they're nodding. There's a lot of consolidation going on in the telematics space. OmniTrack just acquired Smart Drive, which is a camera maker that's forward and inward facing. So there's a lot of data there, but if you don't know what you're looking for, you'll miss it. And it also requires, when I say boots on the ground, not only are your experts boots on the ground, you got to get your butt up out of your seat, even in a COVID environment, put a mask on, get on a plane, or drive if it's 3 to 4 hours away, and get to the scene, talk to folks, and kind of get your mind's eye around how a crash happened, and talk to the folks and see what you can discern, because you'll be surprised what folks will tell you sometimes.
Yeah, great. Michael, would you like to add to that some critical steps that you take when prosecuting trucking accidents?
Yeah, basically is securing evidence, and the evidence isn't just the stuff at the scene like skid marks, vehicles and stuff, but data, what's on a cell phone. This cell phone, for example, has tons of stuff. Almost every second while I'm using an app, it's actually marking where I am by latitude and longitude.
Wow.
And so we had a case recently, we could tell for the 3 days prior to the crash, what speed the driver was going at second by second, where the driver was, and whether the driver was using any other apps, or not just making phone calls, but watching movies, reading emails, all sorts of other great data, and it disappears quickly. And even if you send a letter saying, keep this evidence or we're going to sanction you for spoliation, they've learned they would rather be sanctioned by telling a jury that they destroyed evidence that may have been harmful than letting you have the evidence that is harmful. Because it's so bad. So you got to get in there, and if it's a significant injury or death case, get that lawsuit on file right away, get a restraining order, preserve that evidence. There's also a lot of government evidence that's available online from the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration about a company's safety record, but they keep it for a rolling 2 years. So if the day you get hired, you download it, you'll get 2 days back from the day you've gotten hired. If you wait a year, you get 2 years back from that year. You've lost a whole year of data. And so we've learned to get that downloaded right away.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, the data change, you all have been doing this long enough. I'm sure that you've seen that the changes that have happened from 20 years ago to now to prosecuting these cases. You do have a lot more data points. Matt, any other steps that are critical that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, some of you guys may have seen that show on A&E called The First 48, and I liken it's where the detectives go out, and the first 48 hours are crucial to whether they ever will be able to make a case to solve the crime. And I look at our job as being identical to that. Of course, we usually don't get there within the first 48 hours. Sometimes we do, but that's rare. So the first 48 days after we get retained is the most crucial part. And the thing that I like to do is always try to put myself in the shoes of the players in the case. And that means going personally to the truck inspection and rolling your sleeves up and getting in that cab in the truck. And I personally take pictures with my expert of every square inch of that truck cab, because you never know what you're going to uncover. And I had a friend, Jay Vaughn of mine, who actually gave me a great idea to put a GoPro video camera on your head when you go through and do the truck inspection, because you want to gather as much information as you possibly can. And I can think of a case where recently I took pictures of the whole inside of the cab, and I noticed that there were some dog food bowls and all the debris underneath. And I didn't think it was a big deal at the time, but later on, what we were able to put together was that it was likely that the dogs were loose in that cab and had gone under the driver's feet. And so, and they originally were denying that dogs were even in the cab. And had I not been there and personally looked at that and taken the picture and had the photo of it and had it ready to bring up on the screen when I started deposing the driver, we would have never put that together, and it would have been a disputed liability case. So it could be the smallest of details like that that are gone if you don't react with vigilance in those first 48 days and go out and personally, I think Terry would say, put your boots on the ground. And that's the most important thing that I see that we as lawyers do to try to uncover what happened. And that goes back ultimately to the company too, and what their policy was on how they trained this driver. And so we put the pieces of the pie together and we gather all that evidence, and then we refine it, and then we theme our case based on that. And the evidence frames our case theme, and so that's how we spend the rest of our time theming the case through the evidence.
Great, thank you. Let's keep this one going. This is some of the good stuff here that I know our viewers are attending primarily to hear, which is tips and tricks and things like that. Terry, do you have anything you want to add as far as other crucial steps or techniques that you've used?
Well, it's, a lot of it is just by experience. That there's a big carrier in your state, in East Tennessee. In fact, they're one of the top 10 truckload carriers every year. And I had or what's called, they call them underride crashes. Most jurors just call them rear end cases. Okay. So you've got to overcome the bias of someone running into the back of a truck. They're underride cases, and words hurt and words matter sometimes how you do them. This case was in East Tennessee. When I say a rock star kid got killed, was getting ready to go to dental school, turned down Penn, turned down another prestigious dental school to go to Loma Linda University. He was a devout Seventh-day Adventist, and he got killed in Chattanooga, up in Bradley County, heading out of Chattanooga towards Nashville.
Wow.
And initially, this company has a huge economic footprint, not only in East Tennessee, throughout Tennessee. And I got the initial reports and said there's no photographs. My reaction to that is BS. Anytime there's a fatality on a big, what I call a big road like that, you're going to have what would you do if you saw it? You call 911, fire gets dispatched, went to the fire department, initially told no, sent open records, do you have anything? No. Then I get the local newspaper, shows a reporter on the scene. He had probably about 28 photographs.
Wow.
In one of those photographs, it shows a firefighter with his iPhone in hand taking photographs at the scene.
Goodness.
So I wrote the chief back and I said, I'm going to be over there tomorrow. Here's a copy of the photograph. Can you track this fella down and see if anybody else does? Well, when I got there, there was actually an audience. There were the folks that were on both crews, and I wound up with a couple of hundreds, but this is the real nugget. When I get there and they go, yeah, and blank was there, his wife is general counsel for the trucking company.
Oh my gosh.
Not only was she the general counsel for the trucking company, she is the daughter of one of the two then founders, and that gentleman had, if I told you the name of the company, everybody on this server would know who they are. And she was actually married to the guy who was a captain in the fire department at the time. So not surprisingly, if you just took it on first glance and you don't get out of your seat, you have no evidence, and it puts you at a disadvantage. But once we got all that evidence and tied this stuff together, doors started opening and the case resolved. But it's that you get lucky because you work hard. You got to get out. You got to, crack some doors. You got to be persistent. And, the notion that you have a fatality and there's not a pic to be shown doesn't wash.
Yeah.
And,
So,
diligent lawyers, Mike and Matt, know that. And you get lucky sometimes by being persistent and being hard-headed about stuff.
Yeah, for us older guys, reminds me of the TV show in the 70s with Peter Falk, Columbo. Oh, just one last question. You say there are no pictures? Let me ask you about this guy right here in the photograph with the fire suit on. All right, Michael, what else have you had success with as far as techniques or?
Yeah, well, just assume that everything they tell you is a lie. And unless you can prove that they're telling you the truth, because otherwise you're going to be deeply disappointed and frustrated all the time. So I'll give you an example. We had a case, and the police report, and get everything you can. So the police report shows that the crash happened at 7:15, and they show us, look, at 7:15 he's not on the phone, he's not using the phone, there's nothing happening with the phone. But we got the 911 call records that showed that it was 7:12 when 911 was called. Well, you can't call the 911 before the crash happens.
Right.
And we also showed that, they were claiming certain signs weren't visible. Well, we got the police officer's dash cam video. And the thing about the dash cam video is it showed the roadway, not just what was on the scene, but it showed the roadway leading up to the scene, and all the signs were completely visible. And based on that, we were able to actually get a forensic download of the phone, and we were able to go show that 3 seconds before the crash, he was touching an app. He was actually messing with the app. Unfortunately, it was the Bible app. I wish it was a different app, but at least it was an app. But he was, and he lied about it. He was messing with it, and we could really get the time, because 3 seconds later the phone went from vertical to horizontal, and it's the only time they did that, which is totally consistent with the crash happening and the phone flying out. So the other thing is just always assume they're on the phone until you prove that they're not. And it's not just phone calls. There are a ton of things you can do with your phone that distract you other than talking on the phone.
Sure.
You can be surfing the internet, watching a movie, reading things. There are lots of programs that allow drivers to make voice calls and to send texts that don't show up on the cell phone bill as a call or a text. You can use WhatsApp, you can use a million, there's all these different cheater apps out there. What I call cheater apps, I mean, they're like, you hook up with people of the same or opposite sex, depending on what you like, in various cities out there. And you know, we had one guy, he worked out of his house, but he drove for a living. And every morning when he got to work, he installed these 4 apps. And every day before he went home, he uninstalled those 4 apps and deleted all the data. And it was pretty clear that, you know, he's adding these 4, he's talking to people, he's bored while he's on the road, so he's trying to, you know, organize his hookups that he's going to have. And then he deleted them all so his wife wouldn't see this stuff on the phone. And, you know, it's so boring. These guys, they work 14 hours a day away from home, up to 11 hours driving. They get bored. And because they're bored and they have these things with them, they use them and they're looking at them and they're crashing into people. And so assume they're lying, get the data. It is so fun because you find, you know, all kinds of crazy things they're doing while they're driving.
I like it. I think it's fascinating how you have to know about so many different things about data and about physics and about psychology and things like that. Matt, anything else you want to add in terms of critical steps that you want to share with the audience?
Well, in these cases, I think we talked a lot about what we do to gather the data and gather all the evidence, and that goes, the net that you want to cast goes well outside of the crash site itself, although that's a very much important part of it too. And, you know, one thing that we do that we have to compete with these defense firms and motor carriers that have their own rapid response teams, and they always have people out there the minute that the crash happens, and they'll hire the closest reconstructionist who's going to be out there, and those people have been trained to communicate with law enforcement to try to sway the report.
Oh my God.
And so what we find is that if we don't have the same resources that we can, you know, we're not going to beat them out there. 9 times out of 10, we're not going to beat them out there. But we've got to have the same resources and the same kind of team put together that when we do get that call, that we on a dime can deploy our people out there to try to undo all the harm that was done. Like Michael was saying, all the lies that they've created. And if we don't do that as fast as possible, what's going to happen is we're going to lose a lot of the ability to do that, to combat that, because I've had reconstructionists go out there, and if they get out there soon enough, they're going to still be able to see the paint that was left by the Tennessee Highway Patrol here in Tennessee, and that's always a fluorescent orange, but we know who their people have been out because they'll have paint in a different color that marks the skid marks and the yaw marks and all that. And the last one I was out, I knew their people had been there because they had purple paint out there, and if we didn't get out there that fast, we would have missed that. And there was a discrepancy in where the paint was marked between the purple paint and the fluorescent orange paint that THP had put out there. And if I didn't get photos of that by the time it had worn away, we would have not been able to show that there's an underlying assumption that was made by the defense reconstructionist that was false. Because
I guess it kind of echoes what Michael was saying earlier. What's different about trucking cases is that there's a lot more money there at stake, right? Because there are bigger policies and unfortunately horrendous accidents, but there's also therefore more money on the other side working against you.
Exactly.
So my book's called How David Beats Goliath. So you guys are all Davids going against super Goliath in this case. So before we continue, we have a question. Is this being recorded, and will we be able to access it in the future? If I could spit that out. Yes, it is. It's being recorded. I can see right now this session is being recorded. And if you registered for this, you must have, because you got in here and asked a question, you'll be receiving an email the next day or two with a recording of this video. So this is fascinating. I think this is really interesting. Terry, why is it essential to hire a trucking accident specialist, not just a personal injury lawyer? If you are a loved one and is hurt by a truck that crashes or something like this, why is it important to find a specialist?
Well, they're different for the 3 reasons we talked about earlier. 1, the physics of how they occur. Number 2, the technology. When I say telematics, and that can be anything from a cell phone to some device that the person, the truck driver themselves are wearing, cameras around the scene, on the approaches, that kind of stuff. And then the regulatory aspects, they're not simple case. If you get a DUI and the guy crosses the center line and he's in a Suburban and it has an ACM, an airbag control module, can rely to some degree, even if you're late to the game, on local police marshaling up evidence. That is absolutely not the case in trucking. The weak get punished, and the slow get punished.
Wow.
I have seen great cases where you look at it and you say, there's more to this, but time is gone, and I don't, how do you unravel it? And then you also get into what I call institutional prejudice, like that. There's in Georgia, there's case law that says the failure of a trucking company to save its telematics data raises an issue that you may get presumptions against them, but the big but it can be rebutted by other evidence where there's no harm. And if you get a defense expert who was on the job within 6 to 8, 12 hours after a crash, who comes up with a paradigm or a nonsensical story, and they have some tenets of evidence, whether it's photographs, skid marks, those type of things, and you have nothing, and you're looking out of a well trying to recreate the will, it puts you in a bind. And I don't want to, there's lots of folks working this. In my view, every case is simple. A tort case, it's duty, breach, cause harm. But with that said, if there's indecision or imprecision in your mind about how you're going to approach it, it doesn't make you weak or dumb or anything else to say, hey, I need some help. Let me call Matt. Let me call Michael. Let me call my buddy Joe Freed, who I went to law school with here in Atlanta. If you don't know, pick up the phone, or these days, nobody picks up the phone. Pick up your phone and Google, Safari, find somebody that can help you, and you'll be surprised how folks like Matt and Mike will help. If you call them up, they'll spend a half hour talking to you about something, and they're not looking to interject or get their hooks into your case.
Right.
If you ask them later, they may say, look, dude, I've been helping you a long time. I love you, but if you want me to get in the case, I'm happy to do it.
Yeah.
But this has got to stop at some point, after a couple hours. And Mike's laughing because he knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Right.
And the same guy that called him 2 weeks ago and spent an hour didn't follow his advice and say, well, I only had the guy download the ECM. Well, did he take photographs? Did he fly the scene with a drone? Did you get your own expert out there to map it, to make sure the state patrol, whoever, didn't miss it? No. Well, I told you to do that, dude. You need to do it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's economic, where you got lawyers that can't do it. And there's no shame in saying, look, I don't have the dough right now. Get on the case. Do it the right way. And if you can't do it the right way just because of lack of knowledge or economic circumstances, associate somebody. It's a great way to pick Matt and Mike's brain, figure out their magic, and make the better mousetrap, because most younger lawyers, candidly, are smarter than us. We just have to have a little more experience and to do that. But in a lot of ways, they're smarter than us.
Well, book smart.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't admit that there's any smarter than you three, that's for sure. Matt, what else would you say? I kind of phrased initially like, why should you hire a trucking accident lawyer? Really, our audience is other lawyers, and some of the guys who've been calling to pick your brain for free are probably watching this right now. So, but that's okay, because it's fine. Matt, what else? What benefits have you seen for a personal injury lawyer bringing in a trucking expert?
Well, and that one of the biggest things, Mike, is Michael Cowen was saying in the beginning that what makes these cases fun in a way is that there are large policies a lot of times on the other side. They have umbrella policies. I've seen insurance towers go up to 100 million on the larger carriers. And so if you have, obviously, if it's a soft tissue case, it's not going to be worth your time to invest $300,000 to $500,000, which is what these cases can really cost. You know, I've routinely put in that kind of money when the cases get worked up. I would say a minimum $100,000 to get it worked up through discovery, $300,000 to $500,000 to get it fully worked up for trial and tried, because you've got to pay multiple experts on it. You're going to have tons of depositions that are taken. And the reason why, I think the biggest reason, is for the benefit of the client. So if you're a lawyer who maybe did get a case where the family is relying on you to get the compensation to replace the father or the mother that was taken from them, who's no longer able to provide the care or the income to raise their children, the way that I look at it is that they've got one shot at doing this right. And if they don't get it done right, they're going to suffer for the rest of their lives. And so if it means you bring in someone else that's got the resources and the know-how to get the maximum recovery in the right case, you're not going to make any less money, because they're going to increase the overall settlement value by several multiples probably than what a lawyer was able to do on their own. And the biggest tragedy I see in these cases is that people get retained, and the trucking company will say, well, we've got $1 million policy and we're going to offer it right now, and we're going to just cut this whole thing short. And they're not telling the whole truth. And unless you've got the lawsuit filed and you get the mandatory initial disclosures in federal court, and you move to compel them to produce all of the layers of coverage, you might be selling that family short that's relying on you. So you can't, even though the family might be needing the money, you got to have the hard conversation with them. Well, we're going to stick this out longer, as long as it takes, to make sure that you're taken care of. And that doesn't mean the lawyer gets any less money. He or she's going to be making more, because the recovery is going to be more.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's part of the fee away that gets someone to help to come in on the case. And so I know Michael Cowen said something a long time ago that really made an impression on me. And I think early in his career, he associated with other lawyers because he wanted to learn from them. And he may only had to have done it once in his career, and now he knows everything that other person knows, and learned from that lawyer.
Yeah.
And he handles product liability cases, I know, in addition to trucking cases, or did in his past career. But you know, if I were taking on a case that I hadn't had a lot of experience in, I would view it as a learning opportunity also, like Michael when he was young, because there are so many lawyers out there that know so much about this, a lot more than I do. And I still work with lawyers across the country now, and I'm always learning things from my peers.
And by the way, Michael's still young, just so you know, because I think we're about the same age.
When he was young,
I turned 59 in a couple of weeks. I'm saying 60 is a new 40. That's my.
I agree.
Try to keep, Michael, I'm going to ask you to add to that. Well, let me give you a chance to add to that, as far as why is it essential to tap into somebody.
They've covered most of it. I mean, I think just the big three are you get more money, you get it quicker, because you don't have as much of a learning curve. I think most of us know, you file your lawsuit, you get your trial setting, and you go, and you get to learn, so you become an expert yourself, so that you don't need to bring someone else in eventually. And some of my referral partners, I mean, when we talk about more money, we've had cases where our co-counsel fee we paid to the lawyer that brought us in is more than their settlement demand before we got in.
Is that right?
And sometimes
it makes sense.
And look, some of our referral partners, I mean, I think of one right now. In 2006, he brought me in on every trucking case he has. Now he's a darn good lawyer, and so he only brings me in on a smaller number. Now they're really, really good cases, and I appreciate all of them, but he's learned to do it, and it doesn't hurt me. I got plenty of work. I don't mind you getting good.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's plenty of cases out there.
So that's the thing. The only other advantage I can think of is that you do learn to save some money on experts when you get a lot of experience, because you don't hire experts on dead ends as often. You figure out these are the issues. Okay, so I don't just say trucking expert, here's the case and here are the documents. I say trucking expert, here are the case. I've already read the documents and this is what they say. And if you want to spend time looking at this other stuff, you're not my expert. I'm not going to pay you any money to look at stuff and tell me what the trucking company did right. And so this is how it's going to work if you want to work with me. And I've got enough volume where you're going to have to work with me under my conditions. And they really can take you for a ride while you're learning.
Yeah, those experts are not cheap.
I've learned. I've been taken for a ride before, especially in the product arena. $100,000 for bills and stuff. But yeah, so I think we're able to work them up quicker, get more money. You learn, and maybe we save some of the clients' money along the way.
Yeah, well, we have a lot of folks attending today, and so I'm grateful for that. We have about 15 minutes left at the outside. Folks, if you have a question, go ahead and enter that. We do have a couple questions queued up now, gentlemen, that I'd like to try to tackle. The first is, what is the best way to request the cell phone records and other cell phone data? And I'm not going to pick on somebody. If you have an answer, raise your hand. I'll call on you. That's the best way. Oh, okay. I think Mike's went up first. I'm not sure. Michael, can you go first on that? The best way to request the cell phone records?
Yeah, email me and get a free copy of my book, Building Towers of Evidence, how to get cell phone. So one, there's a couple of things you need to do. If you just want to get the cell phone record, which will give you, if they're talking on the phone, using it as a phone, not using another app to talk.
Okay.
And sending a text as a text message, not an Apple iMessage, which is the default on the iPhone for iPhone to iPhone, and not any of those other apps. But it also gives you at the beginning and end of each call what tower they were connected to, which gives you a location information within a few miles. So for that stuff, you need to just figure out the cell phone. You get the cell phone number and the carrier. You can try to get that in Discovery. You can use a company like TLO or some other background search company to find their likely cell phone number. And just you have to send a subpoena to them. You have to be in litigation.
Okay.
That is going to get you about 2% of the useful information. For the really good stuff, you need to get a forensic expert to physically take the phone, hook it up, and download it. You're going to have to negotiate a protocol with your opposing lawyer because there's a lot of stuff that's really private and personal that's got nothing to do with the case as to what your expert's going to be able to get, giving the other side a chance to review for privileged stuff before it gets turned over to you and stuff like that. But it can be done. But honestly, I really and truly have written a book on it, and I'd be happy to share it with you.
That's great. What's the name of the book again?
Building Towers of Evidence. I forgot what the subtitle is, but I know it's the Towers of Evidence book. I knew when I wrote it.
Well, we're going to put up everyone's contact information. We're going to, what's that, Matt?
I said, I've got it, a copy sitting over here.
You can wave it at us. That's awesome. So yeah, we'll be putting up contact information at the end of the webinar here. So if you want to reach out to Michael, get a copy of that. Matt, your hand went up too, though. Is there anything you want to add on cell phone?
Well, I agree with everything that Michael said. I think the only way that you're really going to get everything that's on the phone and the real useful stuff, you're not going to get it through the cell phone bill. You're going to get it through doing a forensic inspection and download. But remember, when you start pushing for that, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And so what I mean by that is you got to be prepared that your client's got to preserve their own cell phone. So it wouldn't be fair and the judge won't think it's fair. You got to show the court you're being reasonable. And so, Your Honor, if I'm insisting that they produce his phone, my client's going to produce their phone too. And we're going to agree on the same protocol. And so that will hopefully eliminate any doubt that your client was on their phone when the crash happened. But you got to be prepared for that. You can't go in and say, oh, well, my client traded in their phone because they got a new model, but I want them to have preserved it. And that's part of your intake protocol, is make sure that your own client's cell phone and everything else that's potentially relevant to the case is preserved, because you're gonna, if you haven't done that, you're gonna miss out on the opportunity to have the judge angry at the other side and make them produce the things that you're claiming should have been preserved. So always keep that in mind when you're making these demands on the defense, that it's only fair and reasonable that we have to do the same thing that we're demanding that they do.
Yeah, interesting strategy. Terry, you want to add anything on telemetrics?
Yeah, just that, what Matt, most vehicles today, Mike, I don't know what kind of car you drive, but you probably got Apple CarPlay. Chrysler has what they call infotainment centers. And even if you go to the airport and rent a car, you get in, it'll ask you to sync and to download your data. The minute you do that, everything on your phone is downloaded to the hard drive in the vehicle that's
Oh my
there.
gosh, that's scary.
So, for example, if you've got a brand new Charger and there's probably one of the lawyers, younger lawyers, who's chasing girls or chasing guys around, might have a hot rod, but those Chryslers have it's a, basically a telematics device. It downloads all the texts, cell phone numbers. If you've got messages inside your phone numbers in your contacts, downloads it onto a hard drive that's inside the vehicle. And what I'm seeing more and more these days are you've got to not only be vigilant to make sure the other side saves their vehicle, you got to play defense. And my view of the world is I can deal with bad evidence. What I can't deal with are surprises and clients that don't tell the truth to me.
Oh.
So if you have if you have a modern vehicle and you know what its telematics devices are, and you should know that, and it's readily discernible from the internet, you need to do this, exactly what Matt said, and I call it rubbing it on the other side's face. You send your expert out and you say, I want this device removed. Make sure that if you remove it, that removing battery power doesn't wipe the hard drive. So you don't want a judge chastise you over that. You then tell the other side, say, I've removed my client's data. I have it preserved. We need to agree on a mutual expert to download this data. And to the extent that it's relevant to the wreck dynamics in this case, you can have my client's data. What you can't get are his texts to his girlfriend that his wife doesn't know about. Other personal data, because he's a passenger driver. It's a different game for professional truck drivers.
Okay.
They get 11 to get 14, they get 14 to get 11 hours, 10-hour breaks. All telephone calls should be hands-free. What Mike said, they use WhatsApp and any other. These guys are smart. Just because they may not have college degrees, and then they're pretty smart cookies, a lot of these guys. If there's a trick or a workaround, they know it. So you've got to be proactive, and you have a broader reach, because if they're doing the things that Mike is talking about, it becomes relevant because it feeds into the ideas of fatigue, distraction, not keeping your eyes on the road, and then ties into all the other stuff, CDL manuals, company policies, distracted drivers, taking your eyes off the road. And then you can tell a judge, say, look, judge, we've coughed hours up. Here it is. We asked the defendants for the same, and they told us to go pound sand. That ain't right, judge. Why are we here on a motion to compel talking about this?
Right. Excellent.
And it gives you the high ground in litigation to do it, but you gotta be circumspect about your own clients too. So when you're doing TLOs and background searches, start at your own house too, because sometimes clients will not tell you.
Great point.
Things that have no relevance to a crash, but may bite you in the backside when it comes to trial time.
Hadn't thought about that. Makes great sense. We have another question from our viewers. Is it best to file a motion for inspection rather than requesting the DEF directly? DEF, is that defense? Is it best to file a motion rather than requesting directly? Anybody want to take that?
Well, I can only say that I think if you can agree on a protocol and work it out and enter a language, well, the first thing we do is we always send over a proposed protocol. It usually comes from our cell phone expert. And I'll talk it through with the expert, and we send that over and see if we can agree with the other lawyer. And most of the trucking lawyers that I work with, we've been around the block a few times, and they don't pull as many punches as they used to. And so they know what I'm going to do. And It's pretty easy to work out the agreement in advance. And I get something put down in writing that this is going to be the protocol. But if you don't have that relationship with the other lawyer, it's someone you don't know if you can trust them or not, it may be preferable. So I don't think there's a one size fits all. So in some cases, you might want to go ahead and file a motion for it. But so the court is going to be annoyed. You always want to pick up the phone and talk to the other side first before you file the motion to see if you can work it out. And if they're not reasonable about it, then you file your motion. That you always want to be taking the high ground, as I think Terry said, in all of your cases where you're seeking something, you want to be looked at and viewed as the one that's most reasonable between the two, because 9 times out of 10, that's who the judge is going to rule on their side, the one that's taken the effort to try to work this out without immediately going to the court.
Got it.
So that's the way I approach it.
Thank you. Going to go to Terry now, and we're running out of time. Terry, you have a minute if you want to address that question about filing a motion.
Judges hate discovery motions as much as they hate anything. So, you know, my only advice is protect yourself, posit your case. If you think you're going to have an issue with another lawyer, then build it from the outset of the case where you know they might be hiding evidence or you suspect they might. But try to stay, I try to stay out of the court's hair on discovery. They despise discovery motions for the most part.
Okay.
But I am seeing with younger or this generation of judges, they're more attuned to the idea that the one party may not be playing fair with the other. So they're a little more receptive to it. But, you know, protect yourself. And if you have to go to the court, do it. But also, you know, you're going to see this lawyer, hopefully, if they're a bad lawyer and they're doing dirty stuff, keep them in the case. Some people have the mindset, well, you know, I'm going to shame this guy and he's going to go away, and then you'll get a better lawyer.
Interesting.
Pick your spots. Is it something you can work? Can you work around on anything, or can I get the same thing from a third party in those cases?
Michael, I'll give Michael a minute, only because we're running out of time. Sorry, Terry. I want to give Michael a chance to comment on that if he wanted to for about a minute.
Sure. You should send out a request the day you get hired. And the reason for that is every second this phone is connected to either Wi-Fi or the cell signal, it is downloading data, which is overriding bad data. And we had a phone where they turned it off, so it stopped overriding data several days after the crash. So, you know, I had no more than a week of new stuff. And we only had 3 days of location information, that's second by second, how fast you're going, what the GPS was. If it had waited another week, that information would have been gone.
Oh my goodness.
And although we didn't need that to show the person was on the phone at the time of the wreck, we did need it to show that they were doing it regularly, and had the trucking company been monitoring them, they would have caught them.
Amazing. Wow, great stuff. And I believe I'm sharing my screen now. Amanda, tell me if you don't see it. I want to put up contact information for everybody here. I'll go one screen at a time. Of course, this will be in the recording. If you miss it, you can go back and watch the end of the video when you get the link to it. So I want to really extend a sincere thank you. I had so many more questions I wanted to ask personally. I think it's fascinating, but maybe we'll do this again sometime. First on the screen here is Matt Wright's contact information, his phone number, and also website. Next is Terry's contact information, and Michael's contacted through his website as well. Those are all up on the screen now, so you can capture those later. And Amanda texted me and said, I am sharing. That's good. Fantastic. This is my contact information. If you'd like to reach out, you want to participate in a webinar, or you have an idea for a future webinar, let us know. This webinar has been brought to you by Advocate Capital, the finest finance company ever for plaintiff lawyers. A little news, we're launching later this month or next month, the only insurance agency ever built to service plaintiff lawyers as well. So we're looking to become very much a full service financial partner. Terry, Matthew, and Michael, thank you so much for being here, and continued success in your practices. Thank you for the work you do to serve your clients.
Thank you so much, Mike. Enjoyed being here.
Well, thanks everybody for watching, and stay tuned. The next month's webinar will be released soon. It's going to be an excellent webinar about serving your clients who may have been victims of abuse. So stay tuned for that on our social media. And with that, we will log off and wish you all the best. Keep up the great work. Thank you.
All right, thank you.